Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Once people enter the organization and become a part of it, one has to look at the human dimension of what makes an organization function, what makes it tick, what makes it operational. And of the 2 or 3 concepts that we will be dealing with in course of these presentations, we will be talking of concerns of teams, concerns of leadership. We will try to understand motivation and try to build it around an action plan which helps perform and take the organizations closer to the fulfillment of their objectives. We begin this trilogy of teams, leadership, motivation with a study of teams, and I propose to walk you through both the fundamentals and the operational aspects. Try to share with you the safeguards which need to be exercised and show to you what does it take for a team to perform. In terms of an overview, therefore, we shall be talking of the basics of teams, effective teams, the difference between group and teams, team building, and we will see how conventionally it is supposed to pass through 4 stages, and techniques for building teams. Let me walk you through a few definitions of teams, so that you are broadly aware of what different researchers, workers, practitioners feel about teams. Read this very carefully. In other words, people in an organization have to produce what somebody may want. It may be in the form of goods, it may be in the form of services. How well and how much a qualitative dimension and a quantitative dimension they do this activity depends upon, really speaking, certain fundamental concepts, and the fundamental concepts involved are knowledge, skills, creativity, commitment, attitude, and of course, the technology employed, and ultimately the quality of those who manage them. While talking of recruitment, I had emphasized the need for quality human beings, because you can't have a quality manager unless you have a quality human being. This is the definition according to Robert B. Mado. We have another definition by Mannion. A longish one, but go through it. The key concepts here are a shared purpose. You can't be a part of the team unless you share the goal. So, shared purpose leads to common performance goals. You need skills which are complementary, and you need skills which can take on from what is delivered at your job and pass on to the next job what is required there. What I have referred to earlier on in these presentations as receivables and deliverables. It has to have a common approach, otherwise the work styles may be mutually negating. So, it is collective work. Essentially, therefore, team is a group of individuals working together towards a common purpose. A fairly standard definition of teams, and I will give you one more, in terms of teams having a sense of integrated work objectives, which have to deliver in a certain framework of resources, and I would like to flag the element of resources also. We need teams when there is a problem to be solved, and remember the word problem here is being used in a managerial context, which means a situation which requires action. So, problem solving is really taking a situation to its next level of growth, but then to achieve that you need a diverse set of talents, a diverse set of skills, diverse set of experiences, and therefore, one person alone cannot do it. The truth is, in the present day and age, nothing can be achieved by one person, nothing worthwhile anyway. So, we need teams most of the times. The difficulty is, even if there is universal compatibility in terms of talent, in terms of skills, in terms of shared goals, people have different paces of work. Somebody likes to do things yesterday, somebody wants to do it at once, somebody has procrastination built into his DNA, he can never do anything in time. And of course, the people who take the cake are the people who simply do not care. It is not always possible to filter all this at the time of recruitment. So, team building needs continuous nurturance. When the problem spans across an organization's functions or services and involves a beginning to end process, then also you need teams. When a solution to a challenge requires organizationally diverse buy-in and ownership, then you need teams. It would appear that advantages of teams are fairly widely accepted. However, even the obvious at our level of work at times needs elaboration, because it requires filling in of gaps, creating attitudes, and contributing to the knowledge wherewithal of the listeners. So, briefly, the advantages of teams involve better communication, because each one knows what the other one is doing. If there is better communication, then there is higher synergistic approach. The sharing of skills and talents creates a great degree of homophily, extent of bonding which will not be possible if people are in a standalone mode. Learning from and about each other in terms of strengths and styles is essential. the increased job scope and responsibilities provide a relationship where the boundaries of roles need not be very rigid. Hence, there is room to grow and ways to retain employees and volunteers. The decision making in teams usually demands a consensus. And which commonly results in improved morale and energy. But the picture is not all honky-dory, because it is not always possible to create teams, because egos come in, temperaments come in, styles come in, cognitive abilities come in, the commitment comes in, and above all, jostling for one-upmanship can create a problem. But then I was just elaborating to you the improvements which team brings. An effective team very often requires an effective leadership. Unless you have effective leadership, you may not be able to weld together diverse people with diverse interests, diverse backgrounds, and diversity would be the theme, from age to competency, from tasks to decision making spaces. So, there has to be a kingpin, a leader who is able to understand all this, have insight on all this, to smoothen the differences, to strengthen the bonds and lead from up front. Such a person usually comes from an individual who is able to work with everyone, or with different people at different times. Be that as it may, there are certain characteristics of effective teams. Let me walk you through some of them, so that you notice what is the defining characteristic of an effective team. An effective team agrees on and commits to shared goals. The objectives, the roles and responsibilities, they are all agreed, and this is how people learn to work together. However, this is more easily stated and done. There is always a dialogue to undertake in defining roles, and there is always a bit of an issue in understanding who will be responsible, perhaps not so much as who will be responsible, but the concomitant act of responsibility, more to do with who will be accountable. In other words, who will explain what was happening? When something is successful, many people want to share the credits. There is a popular statement, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan. Nobody owns a failure, and yet if you have an organized system, you will have successes, you will have failures, you will have situations which will need correction. So, an effective team has agreement as its basis. It has communication, which is well structured, clear, and an ability to appreciate differences is how communication works. An effective team expects members to be accountable, responsible and prepared. Here the emphasis is on the word preparation, because task does not begin when you approach the proposition, but a task begins much before you start doing it, by way of your preparation for doing it. A good team shares information, perspectives, and certainly progress. A team will succeed when its members have several qualities, but for the present I will confine myself to listing 4 of them. Please read it. You will notice how repeatedly certain concepts keep coming back. Communication, and it usually has an adjective. It must be honest, it must be open, it must be credible, it must be upfront. Talent keeps coming up repeatedly. Trust. These are generic qualities of performance which affect not only teams, but all that goes along with it. Now, these are just 4 givens which are required for success. They are by no means exhaustive, but they are supposed to set your mind thinking. There is a great need to understand the difference between a group and a team. The most important differentiating characteristic between a group and a team is a group which may not have any specific task at hand. It may have been just formed on the spot for greater purpose, nothing more than just being together. It can be for a simple exchange of ideas, having a good time, filling time, more for the better and perhaps at times for the worse. The teams, however, have a given objective and therefore encourage a strong sense of identification. In teams, there is task interdependence, which need not be in groups, and in teams there are more differentiated and specialized roles between team members. This more differentiated and specialized roles between team members is fundamental to appreciating the nuances and appreciating the essentials of what is it that makes a team tick, and it usually works through specialized roles which are mutually integrated, and this is something again which has been explained earlier. When you are assembling a team, the steps to go through will include the following: define membership, the skills, the expertise needed on it. Look for diversity and representation. Choose people that maximize your strengths and compensate for weaknesses. Now, this is a very simplistic definition of teams. Much can be said in its favor and it can also be shredded. We may have time for neither. At your level of work, it is perhaps important to run you through this, so that your fundamentals in teams and its activities are put in position. Teams have a lot of requirements, which may include compatibility and to cover up for each one's weakness and for reinforcing each one's strengths, not just that of the leader. I had an occasion to see a very high ranking official in an economic ministry whose relationship with me went back several years. So, he let his office know that I was visiting, and therefore, I had no issues with security, gate pass, gaining access to his office. And then I came up with the first significant gateway, the secretary to this important functionary. First of all, he could not place my name. Then he could not figure out what I was doing there, because there was no commonality of profession between his boss and me. Then he wanted to know the task, and I really did not know what to say, because it was essentially a courtesy call. So, to cut short of it all, I said, do not worry about all this, I have an appointment, how long is it for? He said, it is half an hour. So, his next question was, and what will you do for half an hour? By which stage I lost my patience, and I said, I do not know how to answer that. Ask your boss why he put aside half an hour and what he proposes to talk to me, and that confused him even further. So, I sat and waited my turn, and as I saw him go around his task, I could get the feeling that he was a little less than average, both in terms of talent and competency. When I went into the room to see the important official, I said, how do you deal with such a secretary? So, he smiled and he said, Doc, you do not sit in my chair, therefore, you do not have the issues to deal with which I have to. I follow a very simple principle: never keep a subordinate which is smarter than you yourself, because he will create more problems and will be forever snooping all around you. I have of course no answers to give to that kind of a proposition, nor do I wish to discuss it. I am merely quoting a remark from the field from somebody at least who knew what he wanted. When you create a team, what kind of people you assemble will be a factor of your world view, would be a factor of your requirement, and will be a factor of what will work for you. Having said that, let us go on more with a specific elaboration at your level of understanding, and simply state, you assemble a team by defining a common purpose or goal. Without this, the group will become hierarchical. But it is equally true that at times you need a hierarchical team. Now, how do you have a hierarchical team? You have a hierarchical team by making sure the integration is keeping in mind the scalar principle. Therefore, here again an adaptation which you will have to carry out from real life. All teams need not be flat, whereas the textbook will tell you define a common purpose and a goal, and there will be views on hierarchy. Determine the team's duration, short term, task oriented is generally better. This again has exceptions, but I think I have said enough which will lead you to screen all this as you mature, as you have a work experience, and as you put together yourself with teams or teams with you. Make sure those responsible for implementing the solutions are on the team. Create small teams, 3 to 10, fast paced, interaction and greater success. Now, there is nothing magical about these figures. I do not expect you to swear by it. It is a notional figure. Develop clear terms of reference and job description. Now, much of this need not be done consciously and need not be done on paper. The amazing thing is, even if you did not do it in paper, it will get done. People will not interact with each other without some clarity on what they are supposed to do and what the other person is supposed to do. And finally, identify the team leader and define his role clearly. There are certain stages in team building, and I will draw the stages to your attention in stages. First stage is forming. Second is storming. The third is norming. The fourth is performing. So, you go through forming, storming, norming, performing. Now, if you are lost, do not worry, help is at hand. Forming. Forming requires team building, where you define a team, you determine individual roles, you develop trust and communication, and you develop norms. These are stages of forming. Then we come to the task component of forming, which requires defining a problem strategy, identify information needed. Yes, you are right, you have sensed rightly again the socio-technical systems coming in. The people dimension, the task dimension. You can go back to the organizational variables, the people variables, which put together defined managerial tasks. In following these presentations, you will find it useful to keep in mind what you have already learnt and not attempt to take up each lesson independently. Yes, it is possible that you may select to listen to a lesson in isolation, because that is of greater interest. You will still get the results, but for better results, if you have a briefing on what has preceded, you will be able to know why something has come, and you will be able to see the logic of the underpinning. But let us proceed with our discussion of the teams. Teams would integrate individuals with groups. It would help members understand each other, and here again there are different techniques. There is the Myers-Briggs type indicator or the application of MBTI. I am sure you do not expect yourself to be an MBTI applications expert here, but without walking you through the techniques which will make you an MBTI expert, please realize that an expert may have to be matched with an introvert, sensors with intuitive situations, thinkers with feelers, people who judge with perceivers. By selecting one from each category, we define our personality types, and these are some of the personality types which shall have to move on to the next stage, because forming enhances team development by the following 5 steps. And again, this listing is not exhaustive. Please read this, because there is hardly anything to be explained there. These are not new concepts, but yes, they are put forward in a new combination. Share responsibility, encourage open dialogue, provide structure, direct team issues, develop a climate of trust and respect. Then we come to storming, and this also I will put to you in phases. Remember, So far we were talking of forming. During the storming stage, team members experience a realization that the task is more difficult than they imagined, have fluctuations in attitudes about chances of success, may be resistant to the task, and may have poor collaboration. These situations have to be handled, which is perhaps why this is called storming. Let us move ahead. If you diagnose storming, then you find that you will have to ask yourself certain basic questions. Do we have common goals and objectives? If not, go through a process of redefinition. Do we agree on roles and responsibilities? Do our tasks have proper communication and decision systems, and do they work? Do we have adequate interpersonal skills? An area where many teams fumble. One must learn how to negotiate conflict in developing a team. You negotiate conflict by identifying the problem issues which can be distinguished from people issues. Be soft on people, hard on problems. Again, like all generic principles, this is open to exception. Sometimes being soft on people does not work. Sometimes being hard on people does not work. You have to very often learn in a hands-on situation, learn from your successes, learn from your mistakes, but yes, it is a nice thing to keep peddling. Be soft on people, hard on problems. Look for underlying needs, goals of each party rather than specific solutions, because each one has an agenda. We move from negotiating conflict to storming in terms of the results. The act of storming enhances team development by joint problem solving. Storming creates an ambiance of joint problem solving. It creates norms in which a reconciliation of different points of views may be accepted, may be attempted, may be frozen. It identifies decision making procedures, and no organization can really function unless it has some decision making procedures. It encourages a two-way communication, and above all, the resultant of any team effort has to be a support for collaborative ways of task accomplishment. From storming, we move on to norming, and norming itself will be discussed in the same manner as the previous aspects have been discussed. During this stage, members must accept their team just as they must be accepted by the team. Members must understand what the rules of the team are and what the procedures are. Members have their roles in teams and their individuality of fellow members. This has to be not only identified, this has to be accepted and internalized. Team members realize that they are not going to crash and burn, and they start helping each other. which is why this is called norming. This is where the norms of the team are constructed, created, operated. It has certain behaviors, and let us walk through them. Competitive relationships become more cooperative, and this is an important transition to go through. You can't be working in a team in a competitive mode, because if you are working in a team in a competitive mode, then you are trying to prove how more significance is to your effort and how you are doing more. That destroys teamwork, but then it is a normal human tendency and not easy to overcome. There is a willingness to confront issues and solve problems, not to create problems and let that prove to the other person that he is not good enough. Teams develop the ability to express criticism constructively. There is a sense of team spirit. Norming also requires giving feedback. When you give feedback, be descriptive, do not be judgmental. Do not use labels. You are useless. You are a typical, and use a regional description. Typical Indian, typical Chinese, typical American, or you can think of names of various states in India and say you are a typical Assamese, you are a typical Keralite, you are a typical Kashmiri. There is no such thing. It irritates, besides of course being accurate. Therefore, do not use labels, do not project your notion of what some label looks like. Do not exaggerate. Water may have dripped on something in small portion to wet a side of a carton. Do not say it has poured and the whole thing is wet. The amazing thing is, people talk that way without knowing that they are talking that way. Now, that may or may not be all right in everyday expression, but in a professional situation this is simply not acceptable. Do not exaggerate, be precise. Do not be judgmental. You are that way. What does that mean? Avoid judgment. Speak for yourself. Expressions like it seems to me. I would be of the view. Do not start speaking for people who have not asked you to speak for them. That is the way to give feedback, and do not use very irritating sentences like everyone is saying so. Restrict your feedback to things you know for certain. Do not speculate. Human mind is difficult to deal with because very often it rushes in to fill the gaps in information which it has not had, and that need not always be right. And finally, help people hear and accept your compliments when giving positive feedback, and they will always hear and accept your compliments if you genuinely mean it. In fact, my personal suggestion is, do not pay a compliment till you mean it. People know when you are flattering, and people know when you are doing it for the sake of an effect. I was saying this to a group, and once somebody turned back to me and said, well, then you may have nothing to say by way of a nice word. I said, again, take my view on it and consider it. Everyone has some strength to appreciate, everyone. Identify that trait, pay a compliment at that level, but always do it honestly. Insincere compliments do probably more harm than good. Have the ability to receive feedback. Just giving feedback is not good enough, it is important to receive feedback. which means listen carefully, and this is a part of being a member of the team, and especially a good member of the team. You must be a good listener. Ask questions for the sake of clarity, not for one-upmanship, not to prove that the other person is wrong, not to make a cause and effect. By registering your presence and showing how smart and brilliant you are. Acknowledge the feedback, because when you acknowledge the feedback, you are making the other person feel desirable, wanted and worthwhile, for ensuring that the effort he put in to analyze and help you grow is duly appreciated. Acknowledge the valid points. You do not have to agree with all the feedback, but you must agree with what is agreeable according to you. Take time to sort out what you heard. Do not go by the first impression, it may be all wrong. You may be assuming things about behavior which are simply not true. Norming enhances team development by frequency of communication and openness of concerns. It encourages members to manage the team process. The focus is on team process. Norming also gives positive and constructive feedback. Norming supports consensus decision making efforts. Norming delegates to team members as much as possible. So, this is the summation of the advantages of norming. We come then to the final stage, performing, and we will follow the same procedure of walking through the basic building blocks of performing. In performing, team members have gained insights into personal and team processes. This is very important, because it is only by gaining insight into personal and team processes could they grow. It causes a better understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. One gains the ability to prevent or work through group conflict and resolve differences. And finally, performance would require a close attachment to the team. These put together lead to the following results and following actions. Performing enhances team development by offering feedback when requested, encouraging ongoing self-assessment, develop team members to their fullest potential, look for ways to increase team's capacity. Now, you can see that these 5 components are really speaking distillations of what has already been explained. It is the highway to effective development of teams. There is not much to explain there. These dimensions are to be felt and internalized more than debated and explained. So, what is it that I seek to emphasize in talking to you about this without the slide? What I mean to emphasize is a good team when it helps the individual to grow, and the individual and the team must grow together, and that is when the best results come in. Which is why in the Indian ethos, when the human lifespan, the human existence on this planet was classified in Satyug, Dwapar, Treta, Kali Yuga. Each stage of description was given its defining characteristic. For Kali Yuga, that is the era in which we have been born and we live and we work, the description was Sanghe Shakti, which means essentially in Kali Yuga, strength lies in being together. An era of associations, unions, bonding, creating teams, creating parties, creating identities. If you notice, everything in the present times requires more than one to forge ahead. Therefore, we live in an era of team building, and it is best to see yourself as part of a team. In fact, you can be part of several teams, and that depends on your life needs and your career needs, but that is another story. There are techniques of team building. Very quickly, this can be seen through this matrix. There is the process and there is the outcome. It is meant for the individual and it is meant for the team. For the individual, the process would be decision flow analysis, performance diary, observation analysis. The outcome would be critical incidents and latency, automated performance recording, expert opinion. For teams, and remember, we are walking again on two legs, the individual and the team. For team, the process would be observational skills, content analysis, critical incidents. For the outcome, the result would be rating scales, team error analysis and archival data. These are some of the techniques which can be used for building teams. The techniques for building teams also include the possibility of an overnight retreat, that is planned team building activities, regular strategy sessions outside the formal meetings, which allows for brainstorming and open exchange of ideas. That brings us to the conclusion of the various aspects of team building, where we have gone through the prerequisites, the defining characteristics, the steps of team building, but in the ultimate analysis, team building is an art. Team building requires working together. Team building requires renewal of the relationships. Team building may also require redefining of the objectives, so that it remains clear, it remains operational, it remains focused on the times and the circumstances, but the teams in some mode or another determine the effectiveness of organizations, indeed of our everyday existence. Thank you for now.